Thank you for joining us for Headlocks and Headphones. This is the last ever lockdown special. I say that, we might do some more lockdown specials, depending on how long the lockdown goes here in Scotland, because apparently it's going to last longer for us. Let's not get into politics. Really don't want to get into politics right now, especially not having just done 3 exams for the subject. But why are we here? We're here to talk about wrestling, and that's one of the things I think is quite important. Everybody needs something to get them through this lockdown. For us, it is wrestling. And when I say us, I'm joined, of course, by my producer, Zoe Styles. Say hello, Zoe.
Hello, Zoe.
Thank you. I love when you join in with my stupid childishness. Okay, this week has been quite a big one for wrestling. If you haven't tuned into anything wrestling related, let's talk about some of the big things that happened. Drew McIntyre retained his title against Seth Rollins in what was a passable match. There was nothing bad about it, but at the same time, it was one of those. I think the ending is something that's going to lead somewhere. Don't you think?
I really enjoyed that match. I mean, a lot of fans are giving the Money in the Bank pay-per-view in general quite a lot of stick, but the technical side of it was pretty good. They all got their finishers in. Seth lay down for the Claymore. Like, you can't really expect more than that. All the common criticisms I have of a lot of the matches weren't as existent in that one.
Well, one of the things that was quite interesting for me at the end of that, if you haven't seen it, go out of your way to check it out. It's only 2.5 hours. Apparently, that's going to be the new direction for WWE pay-per-views until we get crowds again. 2.5 hours, and we did have an ending that saw Drew win, obviously with the Claymore kick. They're getting that move over, which is great. We did then see a very, I'm trying to think of the right word, reticent Seth Rollins, who basically didn't want to shake Drew McIntyre's hand at the end of the match. But Drew said, "You are the man. However, tonight you weren't, and I won. But I needed that." And then he stuck his hand out, and Seth Rollins shook his hand. Seth Rollins, the bad guy, shook Drew McIntyre's hand. For me, that's a very big deal. I don't know about you, but when I was watching that, I was sitting there thinking, okay, they're going somewhere with this. This is going to be cool.
I think the symbolism is strong in this one.
Indeed it is. So that led into our double main event, literally. Now, I watched it live, pretty much. I was quite ill on Sunday night during the pay-per-view. So I managed to catch just about all of the show. I think I fell asleep for about 20 minutes, but I did catch up with it the next day. The main event, for me, as a spectacle, was something very interesting to see.
It was really unique. I quite enjoyed when they pitched it to start with. I thought they were going to start on the roof and they were all going to have their own little bits, the same way they do when they have an arena with a crowd. But the fact that they started in the lobbies, they ran literally through WWE headquarters, and you got to see the memorabilia. There was that moment with Dana Brooke in the first Money in the Bank briefcase.
Yeah, which I thought was quite entertaining, especially it became quite apparent Stephanie wasn't really there, though.
Well, I didn't know that it wasn't the briefcase. Like, I know that sounds ridiculous, but as I was watching it, she grabbed the briefcase and my heart sank and I went, oh, that's it, is it?
Well, you were allowed profanity. The word you said was, ah, shit. But as soon as you saw Dana Brooke winning, you were like, ah, shit. But for our British friends who are listening, here's the quite interesting thing. I pointed out to you before you saw the match that there was a Gavin and Stacey moment in the show. Now, for those who haven't seen the pay-per-view, do you want to tell people what the Gavin and Stacey moment really was?
Oh, that was fantastic. You had the cleaner in the hallway and he's mopping the floor, and you've got the people running down the corridor, and there's 2 or 3 of them that get by just fine. Now, of course, Dana Brooke comes down and whoosh on her rear end.
And that's one of the things that when we watch Gavin and Stacey, if you haven't seen Gavin and Stacey, go out your way. It's very, very funny, and created some catchphrases and made James Corden a star. It has to be a great show if it makes somebody like James Corden a star.
I was going to say, if we have some American friends watching James Corden Late Late Show, he is in Gavin and Stacey, and the comedy is pure genius. You may not get Gavla!
There we go. So, yeah, overall, I felt it was a very well put together match, considering it was pre-taped and apparently taped in April as well, which is quite interesting. They managed to keep the result under wraps. Now, there was some talk there was more than one ending filmed, purely because that way, if it did come out, they could switch at the last minute. But we will talk about a switch that took place in relation to Money in the Bank later. We did see some cool things, though. We did see AJ Styles doing a little callback when he saw The Undertaker's image in WWE headquarters, which I thought was just an amazing story to tell, especially when you saw the stuff that would come later, where you would get to see AJ Styles kind of almost lighthearted when it came to the Vince McMahon segment of the match.
I think when the door opened and smoke was there, that was really impressive because you instantly knew what it was, even before your eyes looked at the coffin. You knew, oh right, this is Taker's room. And then as soon as you saw it was AJ that was there, you're like, okay, there's the story, we understand what's happening here. And then of course you've got Aleister Black just closing the door behind.
Which
Again,
it sets up a great story between Aleister Black and AJ Styles down the line. You subjected me to more torture from this person. I don't understand why you would want me to suffer if I've done nothing to you. I think it's a great place where they actually set up quite a few stories. Now,
I think that says a lot for Aleister Black's character in general, though. He never goes out of his way to set people up into these situations. He never goes looking for a fight, really, other than that one time he did. Literally, one time he came to the ring and said, right, come and face me. But
yeah.
everybody tends to knock on his door.
I mean, for me, what I really liked about the Money in the Bank match was the segment with Vince McMahon. But one of the things I thought was quite interesting, and it's probably lost on some people, was as soon as Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles left, the first thing that Vince McMahon did was sanitize his hands, which is, for me, whoever put that level of detail in, it just made me chuckle. But do you want to tell people what it was that made you chuckle about that section of the match in the main event?
I think definitely the chemistry between AJ and Daniel Bryan is next level. The fact that I don't think, have had like a proper feud in a while. The story arc would be really interesting to see. But it's just that moment where they're instantly taken aback. Vince McMahon stood there, and you see Daniel Bryan bow in a very Japanese style kind of, I'm terribly sorry I even exist kind of way. And
yeah,
then, of course, you've got AJ with the chairs. Because they go to leave, and then Vince kind of looks at them as if to say, are you forgetting something? And he's just, oh wait, no, yes, the chairs. Sorry, sir. Let's go fix your chairs for you. And I think that's fantastic.
It was when they were outside, and Daniel Bryan's like, well, man, you were really bad. You know, you were really a chicken in there. Well, sorry, it was AJ Styles that said that. You know, man, you really were a chicken in there. And Daniel Bryan responded with, yeah, but you were the one that went in and put the chairs away. Fair, yeah, no, I did say that. Yeah, I did. That wasn't the end. For me, we had a Brother Love cameo. We also had somebody very badly dressed as Doink the Clown, which just didn't work for me. There was, yeah, Paul Heyman was in there. Paul Heyman had a cameo, which I thought was quite funny, which led to Vince McMahon's favorite thing, not boobies, but of course black boobies, is what he said apparently. Chocolate titties, if I remember, is the phrase that he used. But yeah, apparently Paul Heyman is up for a bit of fun. And if you want to please your boss, you give him something he really likes, which is food fights. So if you haven't seen it, there is a food fight in there as well, which also has Shayna Baszler choke out Rey Mysterio, which I thought was really good. But we did lead, I know the women's match ended first, but we'll talk about the men's match because I get a chance to tell my Steve Corino story. When he was in the NWA, he was NWA champion. He asked for permission to drop the title to somebody here in the United Kingdom, Gary Steele. And they basically said, no, he's not championship material. We can't do it. They had a ladder match on the first night of the tour. The first thing that Steve Corino did was he actually physically dropped the belt. From the ladder match, he made sure to say to the announcer, it's not the person who grabs the belt, it's the person who ends up with the belt. The whole point here being that when Steve Corino goes to grab it, the ladder wobbles, he drops the belt, it ends up in Gary Steele's hands. The ring announcer announces Gary Steele's the NWA champion. Steve Corino fires up an email to the NWA. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Back in the age where the internet existed, but it wasn't really as big as it is. So results weren't instantly heading over there. There wasn't live streams of everything because the internet was so bad. I will tell you, about a month after this show with Steve Corino, I downloaded a song and it took me 14 hours to download one really shitty sounding MP3. And I'll be honest, it was so shitty that it sounded like it was being played inside a can of Coke. That's how bad it was. Anyway, at the end of the tour, Steve Corino won the belt back, and a couple of years later, he finally revealed that it was all a ploy so that he could drop the title and win it back. NWA didn't recognize it. Gary Steele could be promoted as NWA champion. Great storytelling. So to know that Steve Corino is in WWE and he is helping out at the Performance Center and various other roles, it is quite interesting to see they do the fumble storyline for a ladder match where you have King Corbin and AJ Styles climb up the ladder, and as they're grabbing it, Elias, who isn't in the match, runs in, hits Corbin with a guitar, and it leads to Corbin falling back, and AJ, because him and Corbin are struggling with the briefcase, it falls out of his hands, lands in the hands of, and I know you're excited to let everybody know who hasn't seen it, spoiler alert, who was the one who ended up with the briefcase in the men's Money in the Bank?
Otis. Now, don't get me wrong, I've got nothing against the guy personally. Again, another guy able to live his dreams out, professional, and like by all accounts backstage, he seems to be a stand-up guy. I don't think they would put him with Mandy Rose otherwise. However, what is with that character? It just gives me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah, there's something not right about that. However,
what happened to his tag team partner?
I don't know where Tucker is. I really don't know where Tucker is. But let's look at the women's one. Right, so the women's one had some quite entertaining spots. Like I say, Shayna Baszler choked out Rey Mysterio. We then led into the stuff up on the roof, which was not as extreme as you would normally expect from a ladder match. But on the way up, you had all this violence between them. Even if a lot of it was comedy and staged, it was, by the time you got to the roof, you didn't need a lot. You needed, a couple of bumps off the ladder, and then somebody gets it. Now, the Money in the Bank contract entitles you to a title shot at any point in the next 12 months. And you want to reveal, again, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, we are going to tell you who won. But do you want to reveal who won?
No, you can take that honor. I think it was a little bit more emotional for your side with, again, how creatively it was done.
Yeah, so one of the things that was quite interesting here was they had Baron Corbin, King Corbin, run up the ladder at the same time as Asuka. And a lot of people online are kicking up a fuss and they're saying, oh, why did they fight each other? Why didn't they just go for each other's briefcase? Why didn't they just go for the one that they needed to go for? They didn't need to hit each other. I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in a fight, now I know there's a few people out there, Stuart Gerlin especially, one or two others, who will have been involved in fights, and
don't go
sometimes...
getting him into bother.
What was that?
Don't go getting him into bother.
Hey, listen, he's been there. He's done it. What I'm trying to say is, right, sometimes when you're having a fight, you will be fighting with the person at the opposite side of the bar who said that you looked at him funny or you spilt his beer or whatever. And for some reason, you end up punching the other guy who wasn't involved in the fight. And that's what happened here. Because you're already fighting, somebody comes near you, your instinct's to fight. The storytelling here, some people have said, oh, it's really stupid. Why would they fight? They didn't have to. Of course they didn't have to. But I'm sorry, if I'm being attacked by people constantly and somebody else comes at me, I'm going to assume that they're going to attack me, especially when we've just been throwing food at each other downstairs. Because it did turn into guys versus the girls for the food fight, which I thought was incredibly funny.
I think, again, bringing it back to Shayna choking out Ray, it became, I know that's a example of Shayna's character that, like, it doesn't matter if it's guys or girls, she will just take them on. But after Shayna choked out Ray, you just sit and you think, right, okay, it's clear they're just going after whoever. And Asuka was at the top of the ladder. She probably didn't even realize who was in front of her. She just knew, right, somebody's coming up the ladder, need to get them away from me.
And that's one of the things that, for me, I look at storytelling and I see all these little nuances that somebody sat and thought about that. I know people think WWE don't think about these things, but somebody sat and thought about that. Now, we're not going to talk about lots of what happened on Raw. I want to quickly mention the last segment where Randy Orton came out when Edge was speaking and basically said, listen, I want to be honest, the better man won at WrestleMania, but the better wrestler didn't. And I think that's brilliant because it's attacking this idea that Edge has got pride in his wrestling ability. Edge knows that he can wrestle with anybody. He can have a good match. Or he could 9 years ago. So Randy Orton is no longer going after the family because Edge won that battle. But now he's going after his pride. He's going after his professional pride. And I think that's how you get that second match out of that story. And it doesn't matter who wins. I think what matters is that you're going to see these two guys go against each other. And I think it's going to be a really good match with no shenanigans. There's going to be no chairs, no weapons, nothing to distract from the fact that these two are going to have to put psychology into a match. Psychology with no audience, which is going to be even harder. And these two guys are two of the best that can manage it. Now, it'd be remiss of us if we didn't talk about the Kobe Bryant tribute that Street Profits did in their basketball match against Viking Raiders, War Raiders, War Machine, whatever the hell they're being called this week. I really did dig the fact that straight away, when stuff started happening, when they started dunking shots and they started taking three-pointers and stuff, your instant response was to say, bet they filmed this the way they filmed Mr. Perfect stuff back in the day.
Did that not make you proud to have a wife that would say something like that out loud?
Especially when they're 10 years younger than you. Not that I brag or anything. But this is the thing that's quite interesting. A lot of people hate on that. It was entertainment. It wasn't meant to be serious. It's not intended to get 5 stars out of Dave Meltzer. And by the way, I know I probably haven't said this on the show, but fuck Dave Meltzer. He isn't a reporter on wrestling. He isn't a journalist. He essentially is a fan with a website. That's all he is. He has an opinion, but he publishes it as fact. And I'm sorry, but I can right now say that Asuka will have a match at the next pay-per-view and she will either win it or lose it. That doesn't mean I'm right. What it means is that I've hedged my bets enough that, do you know what? I can turn around and say Asuka versus Shayna Baszler at Survivor Series. And then when it comes to Survivor Series, you guys can turn around and go, well, that didn't happen. Yeah, plans change. That's all that's going to happen. That is not a journalist. That's guesswork. And that brings us on to something that I did see on Twitter, and it brings us around to the last thing we're going to talk about before we head into our little discussion on Monday Nitro. So a lot of people on Twitter, one especially, I'm not going to mention his name because, quite frankly, he pissed me off. He was saying that the leaks over the major announcement that Becky Lynch was going to be making on Raw last night actually spoiled the surprise. Now, I was angry at this, right? Now, you can tell I get quite angry quite a lot. But this one really pissed me off. And the thing that pissed me off was he was saying that the leaks of what the announcement was spoilt it for him. But they never actually leaked the announcement. They never did. What they said was, there will be an announcement on Raw. Tune in to see what it is. What he's angry about is the fact that he has people on social media who actually predicted what the actual announcement was. But they, like Dave Meltzer, they didn't predict the announcement. They picked one and went, this could be the announcement. And then you had another group of people that said, this could be the announcement. And then you had another group of people that said, nah, that's not the announcement. It'd be this. Doesn't make you right just because you get it right. Because everybody can guess something. Brad Shepard on Twitter is a really good one for that. Brad Shepard put up several different versions of the same story. And then when the story happened, he deleted the 2 that didn't match. He's been caught doing it. Anyway, I'm not going to rant about the wrestling media guys because they're shit.
Why you didn't wear glasses so that when we zoom in on your face, we can really see the rage behind your eyes?
Well, that and the fact that because I'm now in what is going to be our studio full time heading forward, I don't want, if I put my glasses on, you'll quickly see you get quite a lot of glare on my glasses. So I'll take them off. I can still see. I'm not blind. Who are you? Never mind. So the announcement from Raw was quite interesting. Becky Lynch came out with the Money in the Bank briefcase, and she shouldn't have had the Money in the Bank briefcase. This was the person who's the champion. The Money in the Bank briefcase should have been Asuka's. So she came out, and you could see she was in tears. Now, obviously, the assumptions were things like she's retiring through injury and blah, blah, blah. But what I thought was cool, before we get to the announcement, WWE filmed the match weeks ago. Asuka grabbed the contract. There's no denying this. Asuka thought she was grabbing the contract, and had there been commentary on the match, it would have been saying that she was grabbing the Money in the Bank contract. But in the ring, Becky announced that she probably wasn't going to be around for a while, and as a result, she decided to ask the powers that be, which would be Vince McMahon, Triple H. I use the term powers that be because that feeds in quite well to the Nitro segment that we're going to be talking about very soon. But what they did do was they made it for the title. So when Becky Lynch opened the Money in the Bank briefcase, there was the belt. Asuka's all happy. She did her happy dance, her weird, geeky running around the ring, all cheaty, jumping on the commentator's table and everything. But when she got back in the ring, the line that got me, and do you know what? Even I, who was telling people beforehand what the announcement actually was, even I was shocked at how well they managed to, even though I knew what was going to be said in terms of I knew the announcement was what it was, even I was taken aback when she said, you can go away and be a monster, I'm going to go and be a mother. And the response from Asuka, for me, if she was told in advance what that was, then she is the best actress WWE have got on that roster.
I thought it was really moving. I mean, when Becky put the briefcase on the table, she made a point of saying to Asuka, well, you've had this for a couple of weeks now, but you've not been able to open it. And the reason for that is because I have the combination. I thought that was a very clever way of you presume the Money in the Bank contract is going to be in there. So why would you open it? Why would you go to read the contents? You kind of, after a while, you're going to know what it's going to say.
Although, to be honest, right, because it was pre-taped, essentially WWE want us to think that she's only had it since last night. Now, one of the things that was quite interesting during this show, obviously everybody was very happy for her and everybody paid their respects from the babyface side of the locker room. But what we also saw was on Twitter during Raw, Shayna Baszler put up a clip of her picking up Becky Lynch and ramming her face first into the commentary table at WrestleMania, which shows exactly how sadistic the character of Shayna Baszler is. Because, I think Shayna Baszler will have been incredibly nervous about the fact that she's now finding out that Becky's pregnant, which suggests she may have been pregnant at WrestleMania, which means that, there's quite a lot of danger involved for both people in that match. Well, all three people in that match, really, if you think about it.
I saw a meme earlier that was pretty fantastic on one of the wrestling groups that we're a part of. Seth Rollins has now put another wrestler on the shelf by not using protection. Sorry, not being, is it not being safe? That's what it was, not being safe.
Yeah. Seth Rollins, not being safe, has put another wrestler on the shelf, which is still, it's not as good as the meme we saw, which is essentially, what was it? Irish man pregnant. The public are blaming the Messiah, which I thought was just possibly the funniest one I've seen all week. Now, in terms of other wrestling news, have you been following wrestling news as much as normal?
To be honest, I haven't, because I kind of rely on you for that. I don't like reading ahead so that I can genuinely react when you come to me and say, hey, this is a brand new story. And then that way I can go, oh, what? That is very, very cool. Because you kind of get a little bit disheartened when I kind of say that I already know what's happening.
Yeah, well, one of the things that for me is quite interesting about what's been happening recently is, of course, the fact that I haven't been watching wrestling. I've stayed away for the past 5 or 6 weeks at least. I haven't watched any new wrestling. I haven't listened to any podcasts. Last week, I listened to my first Jim Cornette podcast, and I listened to the drive-through, which is fans asking questions, and that was literally just to get me through the walk to work. I just haven't wanted to watch any wrestling, partly due to the fact I've been doing exams, but also the fact I don't want to spend my time watching wrestling when the spare time I have apart from that is working and of course spending time with our wee one. So when it comes to wrestling over the next few months as we head into coming out of lockdown, what are you looking for from the business? What do you want to see?
But you know what? I'm actually looking forward to getting back into AEW properly because I've been missing a couple of shows just recently. I've caught up the highlights, obviously, and I've kind of kept up to date with the main storylines.
And you've been listening to some of Jericho's commentary as well, which has been really funny. And he's been burying Tony Schiavone because Schiavone's been making so many mistakes. It's actually quite funny.
Well, that seems to be AEW all around at times. And what I mean by that I'm looking forward to AEW is that I want to see coming out of lockdown if they actually step their game out. It's not that they are a bad product. It's not that the stories aren't well written or that the character isn't there. The wrestling is very good. It's just those niggly technical issues that makes it a little difficult to watch. The camera changes, the nonsensical storylines where they put two people together that really have no business interacting until something else is there.
Now, I want to say one thing here about this. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting, they obviously have a show coming up in Las Vegas. They have a ladder match, which is designed to crown somebody who can get a title match at a future event. Which sounds remarkably similar to the Money in the Bank, but we won't talk about that element because they're not copying WWE. They have their entire own set of ideas.
To be fair, in AEW's defense...
Oh, this is indefensible. This is indefensible. And let me explain why it's indefensible, and then you can admit you're wrong. So, AEW have this ladder match coming up, and the ladder match is designed to crown somebody who will get a title shot at a later date. The first two names that they announced were two people who were eliminated in the early stages of the tournament to crown their mid-card champion. So what they've essentially done is say, you're not good enough to be our mid-card champion, but we'll drop you out of the sky and throw you into the main event for this one. That is AEW's problem. AEW just randomly throw guys into the main event for no reason at all. It makes no sense.
Okay, that I can agree with. But my initial point was about the fact that a lot of the creative minds behind AEW are the same creative minds that were coming up with these landmark events for WWE. So while you say that AEW isn't coming up with anything new, which to be fair, it really should, it's a new product, they want to be distinct. They keep saying we aren't WWE, they make X, Y, and Z mistakes, we're moving away from that. But it's the same creation and it's the same technical prowess behind it that makes it what it is, which makes it less surprising that they would create something that is Money in the Bank-esque. Not as like out and out defense, well, this is why it's okay, because it's not. But there's only so many things that the brain can come up with. And if it is a technical team of 30 years and they are coming up with similar things, it will literally just be because they know that that's what works and that's what there's going to get their ratings up.
Okay, now, next week, we do want to make this announcement whilst we're here. Next week, we return to the normal format. It's going to be around about an hour. We're going to talk about modern wrestling. And importantly, we are moving it to a Friday morning. The reason we're moving it to a Friday morning is so that we're no longer going to almost be a week behind when it comes to our wrestling content. We're going to be on Thursday nights, we're going to record and we're going to upload it on Friday morning so that everybody can, if you've missed the AEW, you've missed NXT, you've missed Raw, we will actually be talking about them, which gives you a chance to hopefully catch up with what's happening on the way to work. And I also plan on returning the fact that I want to rant about something wrestling related every week. And I'm not going to know what these rants are. Sometimes we will just turn the mic on and we'll see what the hell comes out, like we used to do on the radio show before all this COVID-19 shite started. Okay, so coming up in a few minutes, we're going to be talking about Nitro. Seems like we've been talking forever. Several weeks ago, we did discuss the idea that we were going to give Sammy some homework. I know we call her Zoe Styles. I think the spoiler's out there when we set up a conversation to record and she calls herself Sammy rather than Zoe. Kayfabe, woman. You're playing that. Anyway, Zoe Styles, a.k.a. Sammy Bickey, a.k.a. the wife. Right, so this is the part where we're going to talk about the first episode of Nitro that was written by Vince Russo. But this is the part that I want to make clear. You have already watched the first ever Nitro. The first ever Nitro that was unopposed by Raw and did really well, by all accounts, which is quite interesting. Now, I want to make it clear, Vince Russo did not write this show alone. Vince Russo was writing with his writing partner, Ed Ferrara, who was one of the writers of one of my favourite TV shows, which I'm still to get you to watch, which is Duckman. And if Gordy is watching, he is going to love Duckman because it's absolutely hilarious. And it's got Jason Alexander from Seinfeld. He is Duckman. Great show, done by the people who did Rugrats of all things. So you can imagine an adult version of Rugrats where there's a duck who is a man and a detective. It sounds like I'm veering. Trust me, I'm not. Because there's quite an important history of writers moving into WWE, moving into WCW, moving into the NWA from shows like Friends, where I believe Ed Ferrara and Dave Lagana actually had some writing experiences in Friends as well. So it's quite interesting to see some guys moving from there, including Freddie Prinze Jr. and stuff. So there is a crossover between entertainment and wrestling, and that would, of course, lead to something Vince Russo is heavily blamed for, which is David Arquette as WCW champion. But what we're going to talk about today is him and Ed Ferrara's first show working for WCW. Now, when you watched the first show, do you remember roughly what your opinion was? It was an hour long. It wasn't a big, intense show in terms of massive amounts of storytelling. So what was your opinion of what you saw?
Do you know what? On the whole, I actually really enjoyed it. Although it was, like you say, about an hour long, I felt it wasn't quite as seamless as the very first Nitro. As you'll know if you go back and watch one of the other videos where I actually talk about the very first Nitro, the very first one kind of felt very together, linked. You never missed a beat, and you felt as though there could be a couple of extra matches there where they could have extended it and you wouldn't feel like you were falling asleep. Whereas with the first Nitro, I kind of felt it lagged a little.
Your first Nitro, okay, so this is where it gets confusing, because both shows are Nitro. So you're saying the first Nitro and the first Nitro. You mean the first Russo Nitro lagged a little?
Yes, the first Russo Nitro lagged a little.
Because you're saying both are Nitros. It's just to clarify. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting here is if we look at the details. Now, obviously, we're going to go over the matches on the card. We're going to kind of get your opinion on some of the things that happened. There's a few things I want to say before we go into it. Now, this was October 18th, 1999. The First Union Center, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 7,413 people were at the show. Now, this today would be considered a great attendance. The viewing figures would be considered revolutionary compared to what AEW are getting or NXT. And they're higher than what Raw's been getting in recent weeks. Commentary team was Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan. And we were a week out from Halloween Havoc. For me, this didn't make sense. Why you would change your creative team the week before pay-per-view, get the pay-per-view done, start fresh the Monday after. But WCW never did things properly. Now, what I do want to say is At this point, there was also a merger going on between AOL and Time Warner that was very difficult for WCW because AOL and Time Warner, when they merged, didn't want to have wrestling, and they certainly didn't want to have it on the TNT network. Something that was really going to be damaging the WCW brand is if you take away TV. And that was why Vince was able to buy it. It did lead to conspiracy theories that Vince Russo was sent to destroy the company. However, if you speak to some people, Rey Mysterio, Hurricane Helms, and several others, they really enjoyed the chance to go out there and do things that were a little bit different. Now, he only would last about 3 months, 13 weeks, and then he'd be sent home, and he would later return with a new writing partner, who was Eric Bischoff, with the intention of trying to turn the ship around, by which point it was already too late. Now, at some point, we are going to get you to watch the first Russo and Bischoff version of the show, so you can see what you think about that. And then we're going to get you to watch the last Nitro. I feel that's going to kind of bookend your homework for the show, which obviously I haven't run by you, but now it's out there. You kind of feel obliged, don't you?
Yeah, I kind of expected that something was going to happen. I always get some kind of homework.
Well, so one of the things that's quite interesting that Vince Russo always talks about is the fact that standards and practices were something that caused a lot of problems for him. He would write a show and then he'd get a note saying, well, you can't put this in the show. One of the things that was quite interesting was you couldn't have people drinking alcohol on TNT. They wouldn't like it. They wouldn't allow it. So on the first episode of Nitro that Vince Russo wrote, when he was told he couldn't have him drinking, they decided to do something a little bit different, which was to have Scott Hall and Kevin Nash later in the show drinking cough syrup and offering it to other performers. So you could offer people drugs, but you couldn't offer people alcohol. It was one of those really weird things where it almost seemed like they wanted WCW to fail so they could get it off the air, even though it was Ted Turner's baby. Now, what was your opinion when you tuned in to this version of Nitro, the Vince Russo version?
I think I really liked the fact that they had a very simple opening graphic. There was no flash and bang. It was just, right, here's Nitro. Of course, you had the Nitro girls. And it went straight into a match after we saw Sid Vicious. They clarified who the main character is for later in the show. And that went straight into a wrestling match. There was no hoopla. There was no ballyhoo, despite his reputation. And it was really interesting to actually get you into the swing of things.
Well, I really, at this point, if you go back and rewatch, I was a big fan of the WCW product. I really did like it. So I was a big fan when Vince Russo was coming over. Now, to let you in a wee secret, I didn't have the internet. So do you want to know how I got all my wrestling spoilers? I got my wrestling spoilers through a thing called CFAX. Press that wee button in your telly, you type in a number, and information scrolls on the screen. That's how I was getting my wrestling gossip. Because on Channel 4, there was a wrestling page stuck away in the high numbers, and when you typed on it, it put we would call it clickbait today. So it was clickbait to get you to call premium rate numbers. So the clickbait would be very, very clear, but obviously demand that you would call so you could get the extra information, like Jericho signs with WWF, Dudley Boys leave ECW. Things that are very clear, but obviously you want to find out what the hell is going on. But that's how I got my gossip. Thankfully today we don't have to deal with all those issues. Now, so the first match, Juventud Guerrera versus Evan Courageous. What was your opinion of the fact that they didn't really let this match go? They didn't do anything with it.
Well, do you know what? I thought it was actually quite fast-paced. I noticed that the barricades were different, which gives the whole arena a different feel. And again, this is going to be a common complaint with a lot of the products I watch, and I apologize for this in advance. But why is there no steady cameras and constant angle changes? Why can't although they've got what looks like a hard cam shot, but it kept moving from side to side. They didn't just stick it on a tripod.
Now, I think this is showing your age, unfortunately. So we were at this point going through a phase pre-reality TV, and in America it was based on the TV show Cops. And the idea was, and I'll use the packet of baby wipes. So the idea was the camera would be on something, right? But instead of just being focused, it would do this. And the reason it would do this is because if you're watching a fight, you do look around you. It was meant to seem frenetic, constant movement, which creates the illusion of something happening when nothing is happening. And as Vince Russo's made quite clear, he was a fan of Jerry Springer, where the camera techniques would influence your perception of the violence that was taking place. So you would think there was massive fights, and these two people would never even get close to each other. The security was so good they would step in. So a lot of the camera work was often to hide the flaws in the product. Although WCW, obviously, there's some really big editing flaws in this show. There's things very similar to what you're seeing in in AEW, rather, where you're seeing quite a lot of the people actually almost mess up with the sound cues and the camera cues and lighting issues. And later on in the show, they have a segment backstage where they normally have a set, something in the background, so you're not just looking at a wall with a picture or a toilet door. And they just didn't spend the time to focus on those things yet. Something that obviously Vince Russo would have focused on later down the line, but he's brand new roster. He's trying to figure out where everybody's going to go. He's already got a pay-per-view card that's been written for him in advance, so he's struggling to deal with that. Now, this is a match that was interrupted by Bret Hart. Vince Russo said that he felt that Bret was being underutilized in WCW, and Bret said he wanted a match with Hogan, but said he wouldn't get a title match. I wouldn't get a shot at Hogan because of the new creative team coming in, designed to kind of put Bret in the spotlight and get him out there. Sting came out and offered Bret a title shot, and Vince felt that Sting could be a top guy. Sting did not have the preconceived notions about Vince that Ric Flair and several others did. So Sting was somebody who was receiving quite a big push and would later be used with people like Vampiro and several others to actually try and improve the roster. But at this point, they were trying to Vince Russo guilty of the worked shoot. So this was meant to seem like the guys in the ring didn't know what was coming, which I think is quite interesting, that they wanted to make people feel that things weren't quite right.
Well, do you know, I think with the first match, I was a little disappointed that it didn't run for longer. While there was no real chain wrestling or what I would call proper wrestling, it was kind of like they were kicking time, waiting for something to come. I still didn't expect Bret to come out, which was nice. On the one hand, you get to see Bret Hart, but on the other hand, you've just invested a couple of minutes into a match, and it's kind of, you're stop.
Yeah, it's all about the main event of Bret versus Sting, which to me just seems confusing. I don't understand why you would try and detract from young guys when the young cruiserweights were what built WCW's name. Now we're going to move quickly to there was the segment with the lawyers where they actually advised that Sid didn't speak, which I think was probably the best booking decision Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara could ever have made, was to have Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, Psycho Sid not speak on a microphone.
I certainly think, given his reputation, that was a good call. I just want to pull it back quickly to the commentary team that came straight after Bret's announcement. Tony Schiavone, Bobby Heenan, we both know that that's a fantastic combination. But what I really liked about this show that I haven't seen as much on Raw nowadays is the fact that they lined up the show for you. They told you in person on commentary with no cutaways, no graphics, what you were going to expect and when you could basically jump off the ship if you didn't feel as though that was what you were going to watch.
6 months into Nitro, they would actually have one of them at the end of the show as well, almost kind of talking about what happened, which obviously has become, after the bell and internet shows galore. But at the time, these kind of things were revolutionary. And it's really cool to see that these things are standing out as something that you'd want to see. Now, as we move forward, Goldberg arrives. something that was used quite a lot in the Attitude Era of WWF, and was used in WCW as well by Vince Russo, was wrestlers arriving during the show. Now, I don't know, there's something weird about the fact that an employer would be okay with you showing up late.
I think if you've got the pedigree of someone like Vicious or Goldberg, if you're drawing the numbers, an employer isn't going to care that much if you're not there when he necessarily wants you to. You know, it's like if you start at 3 o'clock for your Saturday shift, you're not showing up at 2:45 to make sure you're definitely on time. You're showing up maybe 2:57 so that they know you're there, but you're not giving them any more time than you absolutely have to. It's the same principle with wrestling. If you're drawing numbers, if you're making money, why are you giving them any of your valuable time? Unless you absolutely have to.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, talking about valuable time, I mean, if we move into later segments just now, Disco Inferno beat Vampiro, something that I remember watching that and thinking, well, why on earth would you have the comedy guy beat Vampiro, who is huge in Mexico, somebody who you could really push and give quite a lot of momentum to? He's never going to be your top guy, but he could be a huge part of your company's attempt to keep ratings up. And I think Vince Russo was a fan of Disco Inferno, but he also was friends with him as well. So I think sometimes Vince Russo is guilty of that, where he will help somebody, even if it's not quite great for the product. Now, Disco Inferno is somebody who has a very interesting idea of what a good booker is. He has had some ridiculous ideas. He's even done an entire shoot interview about his bad booking ideas. He's turned it into a gimmick, which is quite funny. Now, during this one, we actually had Las LaRue, who was on commentary, who was a decent in-ring worker. His mic work was shocking, and Vince Russo thought that he was going to be somebody that was going to become a big star, almost like a Chris Jericho. It just needed a bit of a shining up, which is quite interesting. But we move into a Medusa interview where she came out and said she didn't want to do an evening gown match. And Vince Russo said he wanted to have her in the show in a prominent role. What did you think of how Medusa was being used here?
I think that Medusa had a good argument in some ways, that obviously she's a serious wrestler. She wants to be taken seriously. Being in an evening dress is not going to do that. But then at the same time, you can argue that if women are getting some TV time, what should it matter really how that time is used? And this, I don't mean that as a degrading thing. I genuinely, I think that if you can show off your skill, if you can showcase your talent, if you have to do it in an evening gown and then go to them the next time and say, listen, look, I did it your way in an evening gown. You can see that I've got the skills. Take me more seriously. It's the same as the Saudi Arabia principle.
Yeah, but does Medusa have to prove her point 12 years into being on national television? I mean, you know, I think it was more than that. I mean, I think that's one of those, I get the point, new team comes in, go out and impress them. But if I'm booking a wrestling company and I have Kurt Angle, I'm not asking him to go out there and show me a technical wrestling match so I can see what he can do. You should know what he can do. And it's the same with Medusa. You should know what she can do. She carried the women's division in WWF. She was the women's division in WCW. So that's one of those things where I think Vince Russo was trying to use her to kind of stand out from what the women's wrestlers were in WWF by her coming out and saying, I don't want to do that stuff. Which is quite interesting because the next segment in the show happened to be the Nitro Girl search. And the Nitro Girl search, I don't know if you caught who was in the Nitro Girl search video, and then she was obviously in the ring as well with Kimberly.
To be honest, I didn't know.
It's somebody that we know, somebody that has been in How I Met Your Mother, somebody that dated George Clooney, Stacy Keibler. She was on the first Nitro that Vince Russo wrote. She was there as part of the search for a new Nitro Girl, which would bring in quite a lot of them. It's an interesting one. Stacy Keibler was one of those elements of Nitro that was always worth watching. 15-year-old boy tuning in, seeing Stacy Keibler. It's not going to make you turn the channel. Definitely not. Now, this is where we had Buff Bagwell come out and he cut a heel promo saying that he was in line for a big push. This is somebody who I really didn't appreciate at the time. But going back and watching him, Buff Bagwell was damn good. The fact that he could connect with the crowd, the fans, they either loved him or hated him, but when they reacted to him, he got a reaction. And I love the fact he would speak to the camera, something that would later help get him fired from WWF when they had the WCW matches. But I really like the Buff Bagwell character, and I really like his song. I'm buff, I'm the stuff, and the girls just can't get enough, which is bloody good.
Well, at this point, this is what I was saying about the Russo Nitro kind of lagging. I mean, we've had one match where it's been cut short because Brett's come out. The next match is so quick that you kind of like, okay, I understand it's a cruiser match, it's meant to be quite quick, it's meant to be fast paced. But we're watching a wrestling show and we're not seeing any wrestling. And it's the go home to Halloween Havoc. So although story can be important and you need to know what's coming up with the pay-per-view so you can decide if you want to buy it, I'm certainly not going to be investing an hour of my time. And at this point, we're probably about, what, a third of the way through the show?
Maybe even...
And there's no wrestling.
Yeah, or maybe even slightly over that. Now, we headed into, there was a segment with Kimberly Page and David Flair. Apparently, Vince Russo felt really bad for David Flair and wanted to book him and stuff. I mean, there was the eventual storyline where Stacy Keibler and David Flair were going to get married, and Vince Russo planned on having Stacy fall pregnant, which is a pertinent story just now with what's happening with Becky Lynch. And what was going to happen was they were going to reveal that Ric Flair used to party in Baltimore, and Ric Flair was Stacy Keibler's dad. And they also had planned on Ric Flair having banged her as well. So there's this massive incest story, and it never aired because they couldn't air it. How do you air an incest story? It's one of those rather interesting stories that just never quite made air. Perhaps standards and practices were a good thing after all. Now, we headed into Harlem Heat versus Conan and Rey Mysterio. I know it's difficult for some younger people to appreciate. Now, Rey Mysterio was unmasked in this match, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. But you know what? I was actually very excited by this match. I love Rey, and the Booker brothers are obviously fantastic. I think Conan's a very solid wrestler, and the chemistry there worked.
Conan was over. I'm telling you now, Conan had TV shows, he had music videos. Conan was over. This is a guy, he just oozed cool. And it's hard to see that now because the stuff's quite dated. So like the way he was dressed, it does seem a bit off. But when he was doing his thing, he was over like a star. And the one thing that I think held him back was the fact that he couldn't play the politics. And I think in WCW that you really had to be willing to play the politics.
Well, do you know what? I really liked this match because there was a clear face-heel dynamic. And while obviously nobody is obviously a pure face or a pure heel, you knew exactly who to root for, even if you kind of thought, oh, I wish those other guys would win. And you got to see the Nasty Brothers backstage actually watching the match.
Oh, the Nasty Boys,
it mattered.
Yeah,
it mattered.
One of the quite interesting things around about this point is if the card seems weak compared to what WCW used to be, part of the reason is they were filming Ready to Rumble at this point. And so I mentioned David Arquette, but David Arquette and Paige and Bam Bam Bigelow and several others were all filming. So the group of wrestlers that Vince Russo came into were the ones who were either unwilling or not deemed important enough to appear in a WCW-linked film. So he wasn't dealt the best of hands. But we move into Meng, which is Haku for those WWF fans out there, versus Hugh Morris, both former members of Jimmy Hart's First Family. This is a match with two bruisers. What did you think about these guys?
I think that it was exactly what it should have been. You had the Meng obviously dominated the majority of the match. and it was quite clear exactly where it was going. Again, though, it wasn't gonna last very long. And I know I keep complaining about but turnbuckle cameras, I don't understand. Why do you need a camera in the turnbuckle? That it just seems like there's these weird close-ups of the wrestlers, and while that, I suppose, like given the culture of the time, that could be cool to somebody who can't just rewatch it on YouTube or whatever it is. Again, I'm showing my age. If you have to go a week with no wrestling news whatsoever, turnbuckle cams might be cool, but it puts me off of watching it because I want to see the match. I don't want to see, a face for 30 seconds.
One of the things that is quite interesting is at this point we were still kind of in a point where he was trying to do the same stuff as WWF, but didn't have the roster, didn't have the talent that were as good. Now, earlier in the night, we saw the Outsiders coming in the building. We've seen them with their cough syrup and they're trying to hand it out to people. But what was quite interesting was the fact that they actually had the Outsiders used to further the Sid and Goldberg story, where they were laughing at Goldberg and ended up getting punches, and then they couldn't get back in the building. It was one of those, I just don't think they had anything for Hall and Nash, but still wanted to keep them on screen. I think that's, again, another problem that Vince Russo maybe had, was the fact that you just have to kind of keep these guys around, which
What was quite
I wasn't a fan of just keeping people on TV for the sake of it.
What was quite interesting about that, I thought, was obviously you've said, they're passing cough syrup, but it still took 6 guys to escort them from the building.
These are the two guys. 2 of them defeated the whole WCW locker room and security teams with no weapons. No weapons.
So have you seen the size of them?
I know, but this is the thing. You're talking about WCW being where the big boys play, and Hall and Nash come in and decimate the roster, and there's no reply. Nothing. Nobody touches them. For me, that was crazy. Now, obviously, when Hall and Nash sneak back in, they're high on cough syrup. So you can't show them drunk, but you can show them high. Not angry. Not angry, I'm just confused. So we led into Berlin versus Rick Steiner. Berlin was Alex Wright, that's Wonder Kid. Alex Wright. Him and Disco Inferno should have been a huge tag theme for me. Just Disco Dancing Fools. If you haven't heard the Alex Wright theme song, we're going to try and put the link here. I'll make sure you remind me to put the link in later on. The Alex Wright theme song is absolutely amazing. It's German techno, which nobody can dislike. So, then we lead into the fact that Lex Luger is worried about facing Bill Goldberg, and who wouldn't be? Lex would obviously play a big part later in the show. But we have this really throwaway segment of Kimberly in her lingerie with David Flair at a hotel. Now, having watched the first Nitro, do you feel something like that, a married woman at a hotel with somebody's son, would fit in with the product you watched on show 1?
To be honest, it made me quite uncomfortable. Maybe it's because I wasn't familiar with Kimberly's character, but the whole thing to me came across as quite sleazy. It didn't do anything for David to be seen to be messing around with a married woman. It didn't come across like he wanted to mess around with a married woman. And obviously, we'll see later in the clip that it's not actually David that's there. And you just think, well, okay, so what was the point? It didn't add anything to the story. It didn't add anything to the wrestling. And you can't go anywhere with it because eventually, DDP will be back in town.
And that's the thing. It's important to note that wrestling is still in the WCW title. It's World Championship Wrestling. And I get they wanted to turn it into a soap opera. But obviously, David Flair did have a match against Kidman. Kidman, for some reason, managed to marry Tori Wilson. I'll still never understand that. He either has a very big bank balance or he's big somewhere else. But we did then see the Filthy Animals run into the ring and beat up David Flair because Billy Kidman was a filthy animal. We had Medusa versus Mona in an evening gown match, which Tony credits to the new creative team. But it's a New York evening gown match, whatever that means. He calls it a nitro moment, something Tony was good at building things up. And Tony, for all of his flaws, where he hasn't always been technically proficient, and he has made mistakes, you cannot doubt the fact that Tony was a great commentator. And if he has energy, he's good.
Do you know what I really liked about that match? Although, like, you know, it's an evening gown match again, there's no real technical wrestling to it. The thing that stood out for me the most was that Mona carried on. Even when Medusa was done, she said, right, I'm not even taking part in this, I don't take this seriously. Mona said, well, it's serious for some of us. Some of us
Yeah.
still have to be here, some of us still have to get on with it. I'm going to win, whether you're going to let me do it or not.
And that's, for me, that is a great story, because that is taking in the reality aspect of, you might not want to do this, but some of us aren't in a luxury position of being able to afford to turn down work. Now, coming out of that match, we head straight into what should have been the main event, but wasn't. Inexplicably, the world title match was not the main event. We did have, of course, Sting versus Bret Hart. A great match between two guys, masters of the sharpshooter, that ended with Lex Luger's interference. Sting could have been a major opponent for Bret Hart in a pay-per-view, and it was thrown away on a free television show.
Well, do you know what? What I liked about that was the fact that everybody sold all the moves. There was none of this knocked on your backside, get straight back up nonsense. The sleeper holds were sold. You had the sharp shooter. Sting really, like, he looked as though he was struggling to get to that rope.
I mean, that's called psychology. That's important.
It felt legit.
Yeah, and that's what wrestling should be. Now, we then saw the Outsiders had saw the Villano's masks, which are great masks, by the way. Any chance we could buy some? We'll talk about that later. So the Villano's masks were stolen by the Outsiders, and they were being worn so that we couldn't tell it was Hall and Nash. Wink, wink. I say wink, wink. I can't wink. Shut up. Yeah, so then we led into La Parka versus Buff Bagwell. So that went on after the world title match. But Buff walks out, and instead of dancing, he's just kind of blasé, shoves La Parka away, and they trade arm locks and stuff. And they played up the idea that Buff isn't really interested. La Parka hammers away in the corner, but misses a running drop kick. Bagwell gets all fired up and stops the pose, telling La Parka to kick him in the head. La Parka does what Buff asks him and gets the pin. And now it's another worked shoot. Now, the Medusa thing was kind of a shoot. You had, the thing at the start where Brett came in the match, which is kind of a shoot. You lose the effect of a shoot if everything's a shoot. Some things have to be worked.
You know what's quite interesting? Like, you've used, obviously, the phrase worked shoot. That is the two words I have under La Parka versus Buff in my little notebook section, because I've got a terrible memory. I really do. I could have watched this show literally a half hour ago. I would still be sat, if you asked me about it, going, oh, wait a minute.
And for kayfabe purposes, you did just finish watching this show, right?
Oh, of course. But I mean, like,
of course.
I've got La Parka versus Buff. La Parka got the win. Worked shoot. Legit.
Yeah, which is it's just one of those. I'm a fan of when they happen occasionally. Now the Outsiders get past security. They can't get past security, and Nash vomits everywhere to show that he's doing things to excess. Now these segments were meant to happen with him drunk, and obviously they happen with cough syrup. But we then went into Eddie Guerrero versus Chavo versus Perry Saturn. Eddie and Perry would obviously very quickly leave for WWF at the time. We then had Horace Hogan versus Norman Smiley. So we've already had the world title match, which should be the main event of the card. However, the way that WCW were setting things up, they wanted a big segment at the top of the hour, which would hopefully drag the audience away from WWF, which failed miserably. They just gave away something for free, which led us into the total package Lex Luger versus Goldberg, which was... it was not a great match from what I remember.
To be honest with that one, I think I was kind of in the same boat. You know, it was a cluster of different things that were going on. You know, Sting attacked Goldberg, Brett attacked Sting. There was a sharpshooter on Sting. Luger attacked Brett, and you just sat going, "Wait, there's meant to be a match here."
Yeah, and this is one of those. I think Russo didn't really. As soon as the bell rang, he wasn't interested. So he assumed everybody else wasn't interested. And Russo, he was capable of such really good stuff. He was, integral to the Gold Dust character. He was integral to the development of Steve Austin and The Rock. The problem is that without somebody like McMahon filtering him, there is a lot of stuff here where it's like, well, why do you do that? You don't have to do that, and that becomes a problem.
The thing that I really loved that we kind of skipped over a little bit that I want to bring back to is the Chavo, Eddie, and Perry Saturn match. I mean, as you know, Eddie is one of my favorites and like gone way too soon. And I really you genuinely felt the heat in that match. And we got to see some technical wrestling. I did not realize how good.
To have a match on the show somewhere that was half decent.
I legitimately did not realize how good Saturn was until I saw this match. And I
have to show you. I definitely have to show you some of his work with the Eliminators. I mean, his stuff with the Eliminators in ECW. He was actually quite a high-flying guy before he started working out and getting a little. He wasn't out of shape, but his body changed. His stuff in the Eliminators, particularly the finishing moves and stuff. Some of the stuff in there you will look at and you will look and see that some of the indie guys, particularly like the Young Bucks and stuff like that. Perry Saturn is somebody who, even if they don't think it, he influenced their work. Now, one of the things that's quite interesting is that when you look at reviews for this show, they always talk about what was the point of the Outsiders being high on cough syrup. And obviously, when you find out later on, the reason for that was they couldn't do the alcohol story, which was designed to feed off the idea that Scott Hall was an alcoholic. And I mean, you can look at the potential ways that they were going to go with that. In terms of, Kevin Nash is enabling an alcoholic, Kevin Nash is maybe partying with him to protect him, all these ideas they could have went with, and they couldn't do it because they decided to throw it away by being funny in the first show, and now you can't really do the story after that. Now, the thing that stood out for me, and I don't know if this stood out for you, the Sunday after this was the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view. It wasn't mentioned. They mentioned the Hogan versus Sid match. But other than that, essentially, this was a show that mentioned that there was a pay-per-view once at the start and maybe once during a recap where Sid was talking about, but it was literally a repeat of the thing that had happened in hour one. So there was no mention of a pay-per-view. And I think the reason for that is they hadn't written the pay-per-view. It was just something that was incidental to them.
They actually referenced 3 of the key matches throughout the show, but it was tucked away with all the commentary stuff. So unless you were actually listening to every single word, you might have missed it. But they did put a graphic on. They did actually cut away to the whole thing, and they promoted the hell out of it for about 10 seconds.
But you can't promote the hell out of anything. You can't promote the hell out of anything for 10 seconds. I'm sorry, because if I was to say to you that I'm the best lover in the world, and quite frankly, you're going to feel things that you've never felt before, and then that's all I say because that's 10 seconds gone. You only know one thing, and you don't know the whole story. In reality, if I turn around to you and I say, listen, I asked my first wife for a reference for a future girlfriend, and she was willing to give me a reference for a future girlfriend, then that actually lends credibility, and you start talking about it, and you expand. That actually is a true story, but we won't go into that. But the point is that you talk about the matches as events are happening. But you're heading into Halloween Havoc 99. It's a big mess. I think they needed to start after the pay-per-view, let those events play out, and actually promote the hell out of that pay-per-view. Because Halloween Havoc was traditionally a really big show for WCW, and it almost seems like an afterthought.
I actually think it could have been a good test for Russo if he didn't go all Russo on them. I mean, I know I'm using that as a verb, but what it could have been was Russo being given a set for Halloween Havoc and saying, right, this is where we want to go. You've got one show, get us there. And it is that kind of, okay, let's see what he can pull out of his ass. And if he does it, then we know that we've got gold. And if
But
he drops the
it's a lot of money to spend on a risk, though, and I suppose that's WCW's mantra. Now, before we go, we're going to ask you a couple of quick questions. Don't worry, these are not testing; it's just opinion based. I'm not going to ask you the attendance of SummerSlam '92 or anything.
You're not going to ask me about an F, marry, kill, no?
No, that doesn't come. That doesn't happen for you, because obviously, if I'm in there, you're going to kill me. So, when you compare the first Nitro to the first Russo and Ed Ferrara Nitro, what's your opinions?
I liked the first Nitro a lot better, but there was more wrestling in that. I do think that one, the first Nitro, could have been padded out with more story, and it would have been a well-rounded show. But I would certainly take a show that has 4 wrestling matches back to back over one that has 40 minutes of story and a handful of wrestling matches that don't even get to finish.
I mean, the thing is, I think at this point they were assessing the wrestling being at times as low as 32, 34 minutes of a 3-hour show, which is just ridiculous. Now compare that Russo and Ed Ferrara Nitro to Raw from today. What do you think of the comparison between the two?
Do you know what? I think the two are quite similar. While like Raw's got 3 hours, obviously, so it gets to add a little bit extra more wrestling in that gives you the illusion that it actually has quite a lot. But if you were to take the Raw, put it down into 3 hours and have a direct comparison, realistically there's always more story in Raw than there is wrestling. And the wrestling is never necessarily up to the expectation you would think for a global product. I would certainly probably, like, par on par, if the cards were the same with the same kind of talent, I would have watched the Nitro over the Raw. But the only way to know that would be to watch
I'm absolutely with you. I think I was a fan of the Russo Nitros as a 15-year-old. And you've slept and woke up to these Nitros on in the house. These Nitros are things that I can sit and watch. There's flaws, there's problems, but I'll even sit and watch $5 wrestling because even the bad stuff can be entertaining if it's done in a way that's entertaining. And that's something that I think today, when I get accused of being a bit grumpy as a wrestling fan, but one of the things that's quite interesting for me is when I watch companies like AEW, I see great wrestling. I don't see great storytelling. When I watch WWE, I see great storytelling. I don't see great wrestling. And that kind of bugs me because I want something that gives both. And everybody says, well, Impact does it. Sorry, but any company that hires Sami Callihan isn't going to get me watching them. And you look at Ring of Honor, and there's a company who, with Marty Scurll as the booker, I think they're going to go down a very good route once we get out of this coronavirus situation. I think they have a very solid person there booking. Is he a Dusty Rhodes? Absolutely not. But I don't think he has to be because he has connections to Japan, he has connections to AEW. He has the ability to get people in there to work. Plus, people actually trust him, which I think is really important. Delirious, who was the last booker, who worked with Jim Cornette at one point. Adam Pearce was involved in the booking as well in that company. There seems to have been a lack of a solid direction. And they've actually apparently given Marty Scurll quite a lot of freedom. So he's not just booking the talent that they hire. He has been able to go out and get his own guys in. And I think you're going to see Session Moth Martina, who is a great British wrestler, who is going to go over and set the world on fire when everything dies down.
We have a T-shirt, do we not?
We do. We even have one of our little figures as well. I like her. I like the character. The character is basically a normal girl. So your next homework task, are you ready for this? You're going to watch the first Russo and Bischoff Nitro. That's the one. I think I showed you a clip where it opens up with Russo coming out and cutting a promo for the first time. And at this point, in the non-internet savvy age, we'd never seen Vince Russo. So,
do you know what? I'm actually quite excited about that because when I saw that little clip, because it was kind of like a pre-trailer you were trying to show me, I thought the roles should have been reversed. For that one segment, watch the whole segment, and you had Vince on one side and obviously Bischoff on the other. I thought Bischoff should have been where Russo was stood. Maybe I'm just being ageist, I don't know. But he doesn't seem like at this point he has silver hair.
Yeah. Well, we are going to talk about that a lot more when the episode comes, but that is your next homework task. And next week, we are going to be doing the traditional format of the show. Are you excited?
I'm very happy to get back to regular watching. I am definitely going to be covering the AEW, and we're going to see how much I complain about that. Again, don't get me wrong, I like the product, I like the wrestling, the talent is up there with WWE, but they're not being used correctly. But again, that could be said the same with WWE at the moment. People just aren't getting the chance to take their own stride and build their own success or failure.
Now, one of the things we are going to do is every week we're going to try and do something a little bit different. Now, what we used to do was we used to do free links on our page to wrestling documentaries or wrestling shows or something that you could watch that was free every week. And the whole point being that it was something for you to at least be able to enjoy. Now, obviously, our show was done on a student radio station, and the whole point was that it was for students to have something they didn't have to spend money on. So what I think we're going to do for the show heading forward is we're not going to do the free stuff because we want you to watch us. But what we are going to do is I'm going to have a rant every week. No idea what it's about. If you're in the wrestling group chat that I have, you know I rant quite a lot, and I will keep doing it. But I think we're going to have a rant. We're going to have AEW, NXT, Raw, SmackDown, and importantly, every week we're going to have a feature that we literally will have no idea what's going to happen until we start doing it that week. So there's going to be something absolutely new, something absolutely unique every single week. And the one thing that's going to alarm you is there's times where you're going to be thrown in at the deep end and you're going to have no idea what we're doing. Which, to be honest, is pretty normal.
Yeah, that's pretty commonplace. I mean, from the very beginning, you've just been kind of putting me on the spot with things. So thankfully, with wrestling, I get a bit of a respite because I can just sit, say a sentence, and have you rant for 40 minutes.
Yes, you've worked out the cheat codes for me. Anyway, this has been an extra long, extended final lockdown edition. Trying out the new studio, trying out the new recording techniques, and quite frankly, I think it's went quite well.
It's really interesting that we are finally getting a studio set up in, location unknown, and we're finally getting some proper equipment in. It means that we can do so much more. It means that we can get people involved. If you happen to disagree with my husband's opinions, if you think his rants are not valid, so of course apparently you're wrong, hit us up, Headlocks and Headphones, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We don't mind what medium you're on. If you want to be interviewed by the show,
As long as you're not an extra large, of course. We don't want extra larges. Mediums are fine.
If you would like to be interviewed by the show, get in touch. We're always interested, either myself or Martin. We like female wrestling fans too. So don't be discouraged. You won't be sat there being told you're wrong for 40 minutes.
No, just for about half of it. Now, here's the thing that's quite interesting. So we do have 2 up-and-coming professional wrestlers that are coming up. We do have the partner of somebody who's already been interviewed by the show. She will be joining us in the weeks to come. But I'm not involved in that interview. And this is something that I've never done before, which is entrusting somebody else to do an interview on a show that I'm in charge of. But I'm going to have no input on this interview. You are going to have complete freedom to do whatever you want to do.
I'm so excited about that because you know what? Remember how your birthday show went?
Yes, indeed I do.
I had total freedom over that. You had your surprise guest. You had no idea what music you were playing, but you were the one on the mixing desk. It was so much fun. I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do. Again, to the person involved, no pressure at all. If you decide that you just are a bit put off by our abrasive nature, I think is probably the right word.
Or the fact that I look a little bit like Holly from Red Dwarf when the lighting gets a little bit poor. So if I do this, look, I am Holly from Red Dwarf, kind of. But yes, in the coming weeks, we will have some interviews. They're not going to be on the main show, though. The main show is going to stay the main show. And from now on, the main show is essentially going to be me and you. And occasionally, somebody might drop in if they have something to say. We may even have the occasional three-way on the show. But we will have some bonus stuff, which will be some interviews with wrestlers, interviews. This is the thing. Wrestlers' wives is something that's never really been looked at. Now, this is not a wrestler's wife, but a wrestling fan's wife. So we get to find out somebody who's not a wrestling fan and how they treated coming into a relationship with somebody who is a wrestling fan. And more importantly, how they accept the fact that their partner, who is allegedly straight, sits and watches semi-naked men touching each other up. And that's a quote that you and the person that you're going to be interviewing have both said, is it not?
Yeah, it is. That was definitely, I've been a wrestling fan for about 8 years now, and that is definitely my first impression. It was right before my first WrestleMania as well, where you made me sit for 4 hours without telling me what was coming up. It was the year Heyman first came back, and you were sat there giggling like a schoolgirl, whilst I sat beside you with a beer in my hand going, right, okay, so what now?
Well, there is going to be more, and what we can also do occasionally is we can do little watch-alongs. When we do watch-alongs, we can also perhaps put things up on the side of the screen because YouTube don't mind if it's a little wee tiny video in the corner. So we might do things like that. Anyway, Headlocks and Headphones on Facebook. That is obviously, if you're watching us, it's the channel we're on here on YouTube as well. If you want to join in, get in contact. I promise that we don't bite, even if our son does.